are now within 100 miles. Obviously, An-Najaf is 90 miles south of Baghdad, and they continue to roll forward. However, there were intense firefights today. Some of them involved troops as they were leaving towns like Nasiriyah, which is also further south, and that is just about where that Euphrates River word is there. You can see that area is where Nasiriyah is. We can tell you that a supply convoy there, essentially, according to Central Command, took a wrong turn as it was following up the forces moving forward. And at that point, it was sabotaged, overcome by Iraqi forces that were in civilian clothes. Now, these are the soldiers that the U.S. Army says are missing, 12 of them. They appeared on Iraqi television earlier today. A number of them seen dead. At least the pictures show that there were bodies in the a morgue there. Gruesome pictures. We've chosen at this time not to run the video. We can tell you that there are also POWs, prisoners of war, that are seen being interrogated, asked numerous questions in that video. Troubling for the Pentagon, and they continue to say that the Iraqis need to abide by the Geneva Convention, which says that you cannot humiliate and photograph prisoners of war. So this, plus a number of wounded and fatalities that they are not adding up as of yet, as the troops continue to see resistance as they get closer to those 6 Republican Guard units in and around Baghdad that are entrenched. So the breaking news here comes on a day, obviously, when the Pentagon was looking for something good. It was a tough day. However, it has not stopped the mission, according to Central Command. We heard from Lieutenant General John Abizaid, the deputy to General Tommy Franks down in Qatar today, who said they are not deterred. The breaking news, though, again, that senior defense officials can confirm the coalition has come upon a chemical weapons facility and is now in control of that facility. We don't know what kind of chemicals were being produced there, but it is the first sign of chemical weapons being found inside Iraq tonight. Linda?
Brett, General Tommy Franks had in fact mentioned that yesterday in a briefing, and he was pretty clear. There was an Arab reporter who had said, you know, basically, are you just trumping up this idea of weapons of mass destruction as an excuse to invade Iraq? And he made it very clear that the United States, and specifically the Pentagon, was certain there were weapons of mass destruction. In a way, this makes it a little bit easier for General Tommy Franks.
Sure, and they've been asked questions about this repeatedly. We saw General Franks the first day he came to the cameras. Essentially, that was one of the major questions that reporters down there at Camp Asaliya in Qatar continued to ask: where are the weapons of mass destruction? We heard it today, asked again and again. At first, of course, Pentagon officials said that there were a number of efforts to find them, lists of weapons of mass destruction sites that different special operations troops and a new unit called the 75th Exploitation Task Force was hunting for, essentially weapons of mass destruction across the country. Today, for the first time, Pentagon officials say they found one.
We should explain a little bit about these exploitation task force that we have. In addition to specifically train U.S. military, and at least some of these teams, we've also been able to get our hands on former weapons inspectors for the United Nations to help us sort of hunt, identify, et cetera, correct?
That's exactly right. The 75th Exploitation Task Force is made up of Army chem bio specialists as well as DoD civilian specialists and scientists and special operations forces. Now, this whole team goes around with a mobile lab to try to test, once the area is secured, first of all, with the coalition forces that roll through, secure the area. Then this task force goes in and tests whatever is found at these different facilities. The mobile lab is used to test the chemicals or biological toxins there on the spot. They also have reporters and photographers embedded with those teams to obviously get that information out to the world. today, you can imagine the Jerusalem Post, which is a well-respected paper in Israel, there was some skepticism about perhaps the motivation behind a reporter from the Jerusalem Post writing about chemical weapons and biological weapons inside Iraq. This is, of course, a chemical weapons facility. So there was some skepticism here when the first embed report came out. We were told by the Pentagon, listen, trust the embeds. They are the eyes and ears on the ground. So I've been pressing all day to try to get a Pentagon official to confirm this, and late tonight we can confirm that this has indeed happened and that coalition forces are surrounding this facility.
All right, Brett, thanks very much. We're going to get back to you at the bottom of the hour. If you get a moment to speak to some of your Pentagon sources, see if you can find out whether or not the Iraqi general who was taken there at the complex is being cooperative and is answering any questions about what kind of chemicals, et cetera, et cetera.
Will do.
All right, thanks very much. Brett Baer, live at the Pentagon. I want to take it now to Amman, Jordan. Simon Marks, our reporter there, has also been observing what's being said or not being said among the media there about this find now of a chemical weapons factory near Najaf. Simon?
Well, Linda, it's definitely what's not being said in Baghdad at this hour. This news has broken in the middle of the night in the Iraqi capital. I think we can safely assume that the Iraqi government leadership is sheltering in basements and tunnels beneath the city because Baghdad has come in for significant aerial bombardment over the last several hours. So there has been no official response to this report that a chemical weapons facility has indeed been found. But I can pretty much tell you that I know what the Iraqi government's response to this claim will be. Having dealt with the Ministry of Information in Baghdad for the past several weeks, I can confidently predict that they will dismiss this report. They will say that any chemical weapons that have been found were planted by the Americans. They will, as Brett hinted there, I think, also point to the source of this report, the Jerusalem Post, and they will say that this is nothing more than a conspiracy between the United States and its Zionist supporters in Israel to try and embarrass the Iraqi government. Iraq has been, over the past several hours, celebrating what Brett referred to there as this tough day for the United States. On Iraqi television, we've seen images clearly designed to boost the morale within the country. We also saw, for the first time today, pictures of Qusay Hussein, one of Saddam Hussein's two sons, and also pictures of Saddam Hussein as well. Absolutely no indication, of course, whether these are fresh pictures or old ones, excuse me, but nonetheless clearly designed to try and communicate to the Iraqi people that the leadership of Iraq is alive, is functioning, and is still in control. All of this coming as Baghdad came under significant attack again tonight. B-52s are in the air. We assume they are heading to the Iraqi capital, and it's possible that the aerial bombardment will continue into daylight hours. Meantime, the Iraqis are, to some extent, preaching to the choir. Demonstrations all over the Arab world are growing. Here in Amman, Jordan today, demonstrations were broken up by riot police using tear gas and water cannon. Those demonstrators putting increasing pressure on the government here in Amman, which wants to preserve friendly relationships with the United States, but is also now under pressure from those demonstrators who say that the United States is pursuing an imperialist war of aggression. Those demonstrations took place even before the Al Jazeera television network published those harrowing images purportedly showing dead American Marines and captured American POWs. Those images have been played again and again and again, not only on Al Jazeera television, but on several other Arab television networks, Abu Dhabi Television, the Lebanese Broadcasting Corporation. They have been repeating and retransmitting those images into homes all over the Middle East. And I suspect that when we gauge reaction to those images tomorrow, we will find that in this part of the world, they have only served to embolden the views of those people who are quite happy to see Iraq giving the United States a run for its money, poking the United States publicly in the eye. Though many Americans will not like that at all, in this part of the world, those images go down pretty well. Reporting live from Amman, Jordan, Simon Marks, Fox News. Linda, back to you in New York.
Simon, you are absolutely correct. In fact, I was just checking a little bit earlier with our translator who we have here at the Fox News channel, constantly monitoring some of the Arab television networks like Al Jazeera and Abu Dhabi TV. And in fact, he said that there is a sense of elation on these networks that basically a ragtag military like the Iraqi military is able to sort of poke the American military in the eye it gives a lot of Americans a sense of real heartburn to hear that that's how it's being treated in the media, at least some of the media in the Arab world. But in fact, you're right. A question for you. Our translator who's been monitoring Iraqi TV is also saying that as Iraqi TV is broadcasting the pictures of the American POWs, that the commentators are saying that the Iraqi government is insisting it will treat the prisoners according to the Geneva Convention, even as they're broadcasting this, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention. Is that what you're picking up from Iraqi media as well?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a great deal of debate about the Geneva Convention over the course of the next 24 to 36 hours because, and again, Americans don't like this, but in this part of the world, people accuse the United States of breaking the Geneva Convention, particularly with its treatment of those Afghan terror suspects being held at Guantanamo Bay. And these images, in a sense, only play into the argument that many people in this part of the world use. They say the United States is pursuing a double standard as far as Iraq is concerned, holding Iraq to account to comply with UN Security Council resolutions, but failing to call Israel to account to comply with Security Council resolutions that affect the government in Tel Aviv. So this debate about the Geneva Convention, I think, will roll on. The Iraqis, of course, publicly will maintain that they are respecting the Geneva Convention, even as the government back in Washington says demonstrably that they are not. Linda?
Simon Marks, live in Jordan. Simon, thank you very much. I want to take it back to our breaking news. Brett Baer, our Pentagon correspondent, has just broken this, that coalition troops have found a huge chemical weapons factory near the Iraqi city of An-Najaf, which is about 90 miles rather, south of Baghdad. Fox is the first to report this in the United States. It's also being picked up by Israeli media as well. Apparently, these are troops from the 3rd Infantry Division who have taken the plant, that they have taken the general and the troops who were guarding the plant. One would assume that they've already begun to question them now. We want to ask one of our military analysts who's standing by with us some questions about this, Major General Burton Moore. General, thanks for being here. One would assume the first thing is we want to know what kind of chemicals they are there and what kind of a danger it is. In theory, the Iraqi general and his troops who are guarding it, this general is going to know what's inside, no?
You would think so. You would think he would know. And I think what's also important about this is the United States has said all along, we know they have these facilities. I think in part they have not shared all of this information with the UN Security Council because of our own security reasons and our own effort to continue to be able to make first contact with these facilities ourselves. I think we're now seeing just the first of many that we'll find during the war, and then I think also after the war is over.
You know, our reporters before you had said that, you know, in the Arab world, and particularly the Iraqi media, that they're going to say, oh, this is trumped up, the United States is making this up. So in theory, our troops, if not Third ID, then maybe the Exploitation Task Force, wouldn't they be under orders to photograph this extensively? I mean, take everything so that they, you know, the U.S. administration can show this to the world and say, here's the evidence, and facts cannot be argued with.
I agree with you, and I think that's part of the reason why we now have these exploitation task forces that are roaming around. We know we've had some special operations forces, and I think part of the plan, actually, where they did not become a threat to us, would be to go in and take these sites without too much combat action. It's not that we want to go in and we don't want to go in and destroy them with air power, for example, because in doing so, one, we could lose the evidence, but two, we're not sure when you unleash these in the air what the impact is going to be in the surrounding areas. So the more of these we can take, the way these elements of the 3rd Infantry have done in a very professional way, the better off we're going to be.
All right, I want to take it back to the other major story, which is the capture of several American soldiers. We now understand from, of course, we're talking about the folks who were taken earlier today in fighting in Nasiriyah. We understand from their home base, which is Fort Bliss, Texas, that's near El Paso, that the families of those who've been captured and killed in action are in seclusion, and understandably so.
Yes, indeed.
And our hearts go out to those families. Question about what we're doing to try to find out exactly where these POWs are. I would imagine that there is a pretty intense effort going on right now to locate exactly where they are. A source of mine who's been in contact with folks in signal intelligence at Fort Meade says that apparently, as of, say, late this afternoon, the chatter that they were picking up did not indicate that the POWs had been moved from the Nasiriyah area, that they were at least somewhere in the vicinity. What do we have that would be listening in? I mean, somebody told me that, for example, we have the EC-130 Compass Call, and I believe we have a picture of that aircraft. That we have operators who are basically on board this aircraft and others like the Rivet Joint, trying to listen to the frequencies on which the Iraqi troops communicate. Correct?
That is correct. Both of these aircraft have teams in what we call the back end, you know, behind the cockpit. They have very sophisticated equipment. Of course, now we also have overhead equipment, but overhead equipment only goes by every so often, whereas Rivet Joint, Compass Call are in the area and can be focusing strictly on this this area out around Nasiriyah to see, and I agree with you, I think it is unlikely that they would have moved them the 150 miles into Baghdad so quickly, although I think that would be an ultimate plan to do that to help ensure they could hold on to these prisoners. It might be difficult with our forces as well.
All right, let me, now that we have that footage of the EC-130 Compass Call, let's show that. So this is it. This would be flying around the area. It wouldn't necessarily have to be right over the city, for instance. It can be a little bit further away. And they can, in theory...
In fact,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Linda.
No,
in fact, it would not be overhead. It is a C-130 aircraft. It is a cargo aircraft primarily. It is slow moving. It's fairly vulnerable to ground fire. But it also has, through the electronic gear, the capability to stand off, which it would stand off out of harm's way, and it could listen and focus on the area in question.
Now, in theory, we would have special forces already somewhere near the area. Who would be tasked? Say we find them. Say we can locate where they are. We have a reasonable degree of certainty, and we have the opportunity. Who would be tasked to get them out?
Well, General Franks would make that decision in Central Command, but we have numerous very, very qualified Special Forces units. We have Navy SEALs, we have the Rangers, we have the Delta Force that all have that kind of capability. The British has SAS Special Forces teams that are in country, as well as some other operatives that we have in country that may also be Iraqi nationals, or at least be able to blend into the Iraqi countryside, which would all help. However, I think it is important to remember that while these efforts are ongoing, we have to be careful that this effort does not stymie the overwhelming effort, which is to rid Iraq of Saddam and his regime, which would ultimately secure release of this prisoners maybe in a faster time than we could if we're out doing it with Special Forces. I don't mean to take anything away from these teams. They could do it, but you got to find out where they are. You got to find out how they're being guarded, and you got to put together a special plan to go in and do it, and it would have to blend very well with the other military operations that are going on.
General, I want to go through some of the overall progress so people get a sense of how our forces are moving, and I know you have the screenwriter there. Some of our military experts have explained to me that we have the 3rd Infantry Division closing in on something called the Karbala Gap. That is a key element in our progress toward Baghdad. Can you take us through what you have on the screenwriter?
Sure, if we'll go to the screenwriter.
There we go.
We can talk about it. First, and before we do that, just to pinpoint this An-Najif area where the chemical facilities, if you look at the point of that arrow right there, that is just about An-Najif. It's about 90 miles south of Baghdad, so you can see that our 100-mile circle is just about like that. So troops are both in the 100-mile arc. So they're within 90 miles of Baghdad. We know that just because they've had this operation at An-Najif. You can see the Karbala, and let me clear this off to help a little bit. Karbala itself is about 60, 70 miles outside of Baghdad. And you see in this dark area right here, which I'll color red, that is a major lake. It's a Razaza Lake, they call it. It has a dam just to the east of it there. Let me go ahead and clear that off. You see the Euphrates River that runs up that way just on the eastern side of Karbala, and this all kind of merges into a fairly narrow, flat area that we are calling right now the Karbala Pass. We fully expect that some combat will take place in that area. I'll put 2 tanks there and clear them off. We would expect the Hammurabi Republican Guard Division and the Nebuchadnezzar Division to be there, and this is the division that the 3rd Infantry Division is closing on, making very good progress, and we would expect them to be able to close probably very quickly. How quickly they do close will depend in great measure on how well that battlefield is prepared and when that commander in the field says, it's time to go, we're ready to go get them.
Got it. If you can, I want to take you back to a question about our Americans who are being held by the Iraqis. Once again, we're getting word that the home base at Fort Bliss, Texas, is taking the families into seclusion, and we can certainly understand why. One military expert explained to me tonight that one of the concerns here is that it appears they were taken not by a regular Iraqi army unit, but by an irregular unit. And the concern being that within the regular army there is some sort of code of conduct and how you handle prisoners. When you're talking about the irregulars, those are the, you know, if you will, the lunatic fringe, and how they may treat our Americans may not give us much room for optimism. What do you think?
Well, I think your assessment is correct generally. However, with the experiences we've seen with Saddam, his regime, his leadership, and how they have treated people, how they treated our POWs in the '91 war, I'm not so sure that they're being any more mistreated than they would by a regular Army or a Republican Guard unit. The one thing that is also tells me about this is it's further evidence that the leadership has been severed from communication with the people down the line. Normally there would be somebody else there to tell that militia group to go easy, and I'd be more concerned that in this instance that there is no leadership there that could say, wait a minute, we got beat up pretty bad in '91. When this war is over, we're not going to be the winners, so let's make sure that we don't do anything foolish here that will jeopardize our future. So these are some things that we need to think about. Who knows what's going on in their heads? I mean, it is a tyrannical bunch. They're a ruthless bunch, as we've seen by these photos. They're reprehensible, they're repugnant, and God forbid if these families see them, I know it would be just very, very tearful for them and very sad, and no professional soldier should have to endure that kind of treatment.
Major General Burton Moore, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Once again, taking you back to the latest breaking news. This is that coalition forces, we have confirmed, and our Brett Baer is the first to break this story here in the American media, that coalition forces have discovered a huge chemical weapons factory near the Iraqi city of An-Najaf. That's about 90 miles south of Baghdad. This is where the 3rd Infantry Division was locked in a huge firefight this morning. Once again, a huge chemical factory. There were Iraqi troops that were guarding this facility. They have been taken by American troops now. I want to take you to Fox's James Rosen. He's live at the White House. James, I know that this story is just breaking. Has there been any reaction yet from the White House?
No, good evening, Linda. We don't have reaction on the discovery of this chemical weapons facility from the White House. However, Fox News does have reaction from the Bush administration on this videotape showing apparently a broadcast on Iraqi television originally and then Al Jazeera showing U.S. prisoners of war apparently having been interrogated, beaten, tortured, and executed. A senior administration official would not say whether President Bush himself has reviewed this tape, but this official did tell Fox News that Al Jazeera is part of an internal video feed system at the White House, and that White House officials have indeed reviewed the tape. And according to this senior administration official, and I quote now, they are outraged. This is further evidence of a cruel, brutal, and inhumane regime that must be ended. The official added anyone responsible for any atrocities will be treated as a war criminal and dealt with accordingly, end quote. As for President Bush himself, he returned to the White House shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern Time today, following a morning at Camp David spent praying and receiving constant briefings on the status of the war effort from the Pentagon and National Security Council. Upon his return, the president held a rare and extensive question and answer session with reporters on the South Lawn, the commander-in-chief expressing satisfaction that coalition troops have secured control of Iraq's southern oil fields and not been exposed to chemical or biological weapons attacks. And the commander-in-chief offered this top-to-bottom rundown of the war effort in various parts of Iraq.
Most of the South is now in coalition hands. Obviously, there's pockets of resistance in a place like Basra. We're making great progress. In the West, we're making great progress. The areas, the launch sites for the Scuds, well, certainly not 100% secure, but we made good progress. And so I can assure the American people we're making good progress, and also can assure them that this is just the beginning of a tough fight.
The president spoke to reporters shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern Time. When he spoke, he said that he had been briefed this morning at least twice on the status of those American prisoners of war. But Mr. Bush apparently had not seen this grisly videotape to which we've been referring. Still, nonetheless, the president said that such tactics present an interesting contrast between those images on the one hand and on the other, the images of Iraqi soldiers surrendering, in the president's words, happily, gleefully to U.S. forces. And to the folks holding U.S. prisoners of war, Mr. Bush issued this stern warning.
The POWs I expect to be treated humanely. And just like we're treating the prisoners that we have captured humanely. If not, the people who mistreat the prisoners will be treated as war criminals.
Finally, the administration continues to work the phones on the diplomatic front today. Secretary of State Colin Powell placed calls from his home to his counterparts in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Reporting live from the White House, James Rosen, Fox News. Linda?
James, thanks very much. Sorry to hit you with a question you're not prepared for, but as we're waiting to hear back from the administration on this discovery of a chemical weapons factory, in theory, this would be a real victory for President Bush, because he's taken a lot of hits from foreign government leaders and also from foreign media, saying that that it's been a stretch, basically, that he's been trying to link Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, and as Iraq has continued to protest that doesn't have any anymore. This, in theory, once they get a chance to determine just how extensive it is, what's being produced, et cetera, this could be something that helps the Bush administration quite a bit in the war of public opinion.
No doubt about it, Linda. This could be, if what Bret Baier is reporting is accurate, and it looks like it is going to be accurate, that this chemical weapons facility, a huge one, has been discovered by coalition forces. This would be, in Washington parlance, a smoking gun. However, from the administration's point of view, it does not need to prove this anymore. From the administration's point of view, Secretary of State Colin Powell went to the United Nations with what the administration thought was pretty convincing evidence of chemical weapons, biological weapons, and weapons of mass destruction being produced by the Iraqi regime. He held up a vial at one point, as you saw, and also played some intercepts of Iraqi communications showing efforts to hide the production or evidence of production of chemical weapons, biological weapons, etc. So from the administration's point, no doubt about it, this is a victory of sorts, but it's not one they probably feel they have to prove. They probably feel that they have proved this point already when Secretary of State Powell went to the United Nations. Linda?
James Rosen, live at the White House. James, thank you very much. All right, we want to go back to Fox News military analyst General Burton Moore just for a moment, as we're talking about this breaking news once again, that apparently U.S. troops they've discovered and taken a huge chemical weapons factory near the Iraqi city of An-Najaf. Just to give you a sense of where that is, that's about 90 miles south of Baghdad. This is where the 3rd Infantry Division was locked in a pretty serious firefight earlier this morning. And what we understand is that this facility, although we don't know yet what was being produced inside, we know it was absolutely camouflaged. It was camouflaged in such a way that it wouldn't be able to be photographed by American airplanes who've been flying over. It was covered in sand-cast walls to make it look like the desert. But the good news is that they have already taken the Iraqi forces that were guarding the facility. They've got a general there and some 30 Iraqi troops who are also there. And in theory, if the general at least is cooperative, we may get some information about what was being produced inside, and this may be something that may be a significant step forward for the Pentagon as they try to identify weapons of mass destruction that are hidden around the country of Iraq. We'll keep you posted on that, but taking you back to General Burton Moore.
One of the Americans is aware of his capture. We talked with his mom earlier, and we'll show that again. She came across this in the worst possible way, we admit. She was watching a Filipino satellite TV feed from her home in New Mexico. And so here briefly is what it looked like and what Joe Hudson sounded like to her and to the world.
What's your name? Specialist Joseph Hudson, 585-65.
General, it's a tough shot to look at. As strong as that young man sounded and as difficult a night as he's having, no doubt. And there are 4 others, and my best guess is that families have been notified. It's been a long time, but it's difficult stuff. We said when we first played this that he sounded like a strong kid.
He does sound like a strong kid to me, and he sounds like he's got the kind of temperament who's going to hold up under this, and he's going to, you know, give strong resistance.
Now, how he sounds to us sitting here is obviously different than how he sounds to his mom. And his mom, Anacita Hudson, lives out in New Mexico. As we said, she found out about this, and there's no easy way to find out about this, but she found out about it in the worst imaginable way. She was watching television and was blindsided by this, and she did not see just this brief clip, but a longer one. We talked to Mrs. Hudson earlier tonight.
He's a really good son and a good husband, and I know he misses us, and we miss him.
He has, I'm sorry, he has a young child, does he not?
Yes, sir. He got a young child, 5 years old.
You have now been contacted formally by the Army. What were they able to tell you?
No, sir, I have not been contacted from the Army, but my daughter-in-law is. She was in briefing today in Fort Bliss.
At Fort Bliss in Texas, and what were they able to say?
According to her, that they brief her that Joe is gonna be okay, and they're gonna try to get him out of there where he's right now.
When you saw him, when did you last see or talk to him?
When I saw him today in the being video in the Filipino channel, I was so shocked, and I was very confused, and I started crying.
Mrs. Hudson, before today, when was the last time you saw Joseph?
3 weeks ago, before he got deployed.
And when you saw him today and heard his voice, he seemed to sound okay, didn't he?
He looks okay, but I can see his face that he's confused and scared. He's very scared. That's why I start crying, because he looks so scared.
Just, Mrs. Hudson, this is so hard for you, and we so appreciate your willingness to give us a much better window into who your son is. I know that not only are you dealing with this, but you are, as we talk, waiting and hoping for a kidney donation. There's a lot going on in your life, and it must be a most difficult time. General Clark, you've had to make these calls and deal with this. What would you like to say to Mrs. Hudson?
Ms. Hudson, I hope you'll have courage, and I hope you'll say your prayers. And we want you to know that I'm sure the United States Army and the United States government are going to do everything they possibly can do to get your son home safe and sound. He has been trained. He's with his comrades in that unit. He is alive right now, and the President has said it's the responsibility of the Iraqi government to keep him alive and treat him humanely in accordance with the Geneva Convention.
Mrs. Hudson,
Yes, sir.
Is there anything that, there must be a million thoughts rolling through your mind, and I suspect a lot of them are just kind of messy. Is there anything?
Okay, let's compare our favorite cars. I like this one.
It doesn't have split rear seats. That's an option here, but a standard option there.
VIX.com isn't the only way to compare cars side by side.
What's a standard option?
Just the smartest.
Does that have the 6-cylinder engine?
Where does it talk about the engine?
And there we have Carl Penhall traveling with the U.S. Army, the Apache Helicopter Group, south of Baghdad. Carl, thank you for that report. We'll toss it back now to Anderson and Carol.
All right, Darren, thanks very much. You know, one of the largest battles that we have been following over the last 24 or so hours is the various conflicts in Nasiriyah. U.S. Central Command says that fewer than 10 Marines were killed and others wounded Sunday in fighting around Nasiriyah, which of course is in southern Iraq. CNN's Alessio Vinci, who is embedded with the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, he reports on the bloodiest battle yet between the U.S. and Iraq. Take a look.
Hours after the U.S. armored column came under attack in Al-Nazariya, the body of one Marine was being wrapped in an American flag and carried to a waiting helicopter which had just landed nearby. He was one of many Marines to die in this intense battle to control an important supply route for U.S. forces trying to reach Baghdad to the north. The charred remains of one of the vehicles still smoldering, a testimony to the ferocity of the fight as Iraqi forces used rocket-propelled grenades to destroy the heavily armored personnel carrier, killing everyone on board. Nearby, a second armored vehicle heavily damaged, the burned gear of another Marine lying on the ground. Earlier in the day, only 6 miles away, another deadly attack against American forces in the region. A U.S. military supply convoy was ambushed as it lost its way around the unfamiliar territory.
Several hours after the Iraqi forces ambushed a U.S. military supply convoy, Iraqi forces continue to engage the U.S. military, who is responding with heavy machine gun fire and 40mm grenades.
Advancing U.S. Marines, many of them as young as 19 and seeing their first combat, called for air support as they attempted to enter the city of Al-Nazariya. U.S. military commanders say helicopters and planes managed to destroy several Iraqi tanks, trucks and anti-aircraft batteries. But somehow commanders here say they did not manage to prevent serious losses in the fiercest battle yet of the Iraqi conflict. Alessio Vinci, CNN, with the U.S. Marines in Al-Nazariya, Iraq.
It is remarkable when you think, 19 years old, 20 years old. We were talking to Jason Bellini, one of our reporters earlier, and Jason's like, 25 years old. He's been doing this for a good 4 or 5 years now, but when you think he's one of the old men in the group of Marines he is with, probably, it's...
I know, it's difficult to look into the Marines' faces and other soldiers on duty and just see how young they are. They're just babies. In comparison with how old we are.
Speak for yourself.
We're still awaiting Saddam Hussein to appear on Iraqi television. He's supposed to be giving this historic speech, and we're wondering right now if he'll mention the American POWs that Iraq supposedly has in custody, and whether those POWs will appear with him.
Yeah, it's really, you never know what's going to happen. We've been told that Iraqi TV is going to be airing some sort of statement which they describe as historic from Saddam Hussein, and we of course will bring it to you as soon as it comes.
And of course we haven't seen Saddam Hussein besides that one bizarre videotaped presentation on Iraqi television where he looked. Well, he looked not himself with the big, thick glasses, and everybody was wondering if that was really him.
Right, and this, of course, if there is a speech in the coming hour or so, this will certainly produce a whole new round of questions, a whole new round of discussion, and which we will
the latest word, it's supposed to happen 3 a.m. Eastern time, so we'll see if it does. For more in-depth coverage of the war in Iraq, be sure to check out the special report available on CNN.com. A wealth of information there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
You can't tour a factory over a fax machine. You can't impress a client with just email. Not that I haven't tried. Sometimes they gotta see that winning smile.
Choice Hotels offers more than 2,500 locations across the country. Because staying close to your business can take you far from your office.
This smile remains undefeated.
Now when you stay at any Choice Hotel, you'll earn triple miles from participating airlines. Call 800-4CHOICE. That's the power of being there.
Every 15 minutes, only CNN Headline News gives you up-to-the-minute reports from Iraq, on screen and on the ticker. Breaking news from the front lines every 15 minutes. CNN Headline News. It's everything you need to know.
CNN puts you alongside the troops with soldiers.
Walter Rogers, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Ryan Chilcote.
With sailors.
Frank Buckley, Kira Phillips, Gary Stryker.
With airmen.
Gary Tutton, Bob Franken.
With Marines.
Jason Bellini, Art Harris, Martin Savage.
Plus, CNN joins forces with top news organizations and our network of affiliates to put more reporters in the region than anyone. No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
And when we talk about breaking news, we are awaiting Saddam Hussein to go on Iraqi television to give what the Iraqis term an historic speech. You're taking a live look at pictures of Baghdad. Air raid sirens went off just a short time ago, but as far as we know, no bombs fell. Of course, we're not seeing the whole of Baghdad, and we really don't know, but we do know that some airstrikes were carried out last night around 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah, and early reports say that an Air Force building in Baghdad was hit, perhaps some other buildings, but those, obviously, any sort of damage assessment is simply not known at this time. And I think the latest air raid sirens were Monday, 9:39 a.m. Baghdad time, which is about 1:39 a.m. Eastern time. So it is obviously an ongoing situation. And the reason we're showing you that Baghdad live picture is, as we said, this speech we are awaiting. We're told any moment, perhaps about 5 minutes from now, apparently from Saddam Hussein. We don't know, and this could be significant. Do not know if it will be a live address or a taped address. Just guessing would be, it would seem a taped address would be most likely, given what can best be described as a tenuous security situation for Saddam Hussein.
It's true, but it may be live. You never know, because maybe he wants to give like a boost of morale to his troops. Who knows? I mean, everybody will be looking at his state of health, because there was word that he was injured in the first bombardment on his headquarters in Baghdad.
And plus all those questions that the earlier videotaped statement by Saddam Hussein engendered, the questions of, was that the real Saddam Hussein? How did he appear? You know, everything from down to the size of his glasses, were those glasses he normally wears? Why was he reading off a paper?
And the Pentagon finally determined it was indeed Saddam Hussein, but maybe there's just a 10% of doubt left whether it was really him or one of his body doubles.
So we will obviously be looking at this very closely, and we will bring it to you live. And again, you are looking at a live picture right there of Baghdad. Let's take a look a little bit at some of the past of Saddam Hussein, some of his reign. Of course, not all Iraqis are proving to be loyal to Saddam Hussein.
Not at all. Our Bruce Burkhart looks at the history of Saddam's reign.
1979, the Pirates win the World Series. At the movies, people are going to see Apocalypse Now and all that jazz. And in the Middle East, the Ayatollah Khomeini takes over from the Shah of Iran, leading to the takeover of the U.S. Embassy and the hostage crisis. And next door, in Iraq in 1979, Saddam Hussein takes control. His image on a gargantuan scale looms over many Baghdad street corners. Radio and television stations are owned by the state, limiting information, but not the hyperbolic praise for a leader portrayed as heroic as he leads all Arabs against the infidels. But even his tight control of information cannot disguise the miserable state of the Iraqi economy and quality of life. Saddam Hussein's adventures in 3 conflicts, an 8-year war with Iran, and a battle against his own Kurdish people in the north, and finally the Gulf War, followed by economic embargoes, have left the country in shambles. 24 years of power. Others on the world stage have come and gone. Ayatollah Khomeini and Slobodan Milosevic. Hussein has lasted through 5 presidents, and not all were enemies. Both Presidents Carter and Reagan provided Hussein with weapons during his war with Iran. A UN food for oil program was initiated to combat famine and the spread of communicable disease. But Saddam Hussein's regime still limits its effectiveness by withholding some food from the market and smuggling oil out of the country illegally. So if this is Saddam's final confrontation, what will be left in his wake? If removed, a populace numbed by 24 years of tyranny will remain, making one wonder, can democracy take root in such soil? That is uncertain. But for now, the objectives are clear. Remove Saddam Hussein and find his weapons of mass destruction.
This is crabgrass. I don't want to see crab.
Hey, I'll get this. Besides, I get airline miles. With your business card? Huh.
What is your credit card doing for your small business?
You earn miles on everything you buy? Yeah, from supplies to travel expenses.
The Citi Platinum Select Advantage Business Card. Call now and you could get 1 mile for every $1 you spend. Miles that may never expire. Plus 10,000 bonus miles.
I use my miles for car rentals, hotels, on over 25 top airlines, even a well-earned vacation.
Plus, get benefits like account summaries. business discounts, online fraud protection, and more. Call now to request your card.
I'd like the Citi Advantage business card and 10,000 bonus miles.
And soon, your miles could take you almost anywhere.
Oh, Paris is great. And flying free? Makes it even better. Smart business decision.
The Citi Advantage business card.
Call now to request your card and 10,000 bonus miles.
Looking for news when you want it? Then get CNN Quickcast, the best video newscast on the web. With one click, CNN Quickcast delivers news right to your desktop in high-quality broadband video. Get it now, get it fast. Get CNN Quickcast.
Carol Costello, about 3 a.m. Eastern Time. Now an update for you. About 60 miles south of Baghdad, Apache helicopters attacked a Republican Guard armored division. Our Carl Penhall accompanied the 11th Attack Helicopter Regiment. He says the choppers ran into what one pilot described as a hornet's nest of anti-aircraft fire. The U.S. helicopter suffered multiple hits. One was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Most pilots said they were unable to achieve their objective of knocking out Republican Guard tanks and artillery pieces. U.S. Marines have taken a key site in Qasr. They raided the Ba'ath Party headquarters and found weaponry, munitions, and leaflets that were dropped by coalition aircraft. Our Jason Bellini, embedded with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, says 100 Marines with tank support took control of that building. Also found inside the headquarters notebooks with handwritten notes that are being translated right now. Coalition officials lauded the first strike by unmanned Predator drone. The remote-controlled drone fired a Hellfire 2 missile, destroying an anti-aircraft artillery gun in southern Iraq. The Predator had been instrumental in the enforcement of the southern no-fly zone. And the Pentagon says U.S. troops have now secured a facility in southern Iraq that may have produced chemical weapons. The plant is in Najaf, some 90 miles south of Baghdad. Officials say it's unclear what, if any, materials are still present in that plant. Also, the Pentagon is reporting 2 more Marines have been killed in accidents in southern Iraq. One Marine was killed when his vehicle overturned, while a second died after a machine gun accidentally discharged.
And we are awaiting any moment. We had told it was going to happen around 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Again, we simply don't know. We are awaiting a speech that Iraqi TV is describing as historic. Take that for what it's worth. Apparently Saddam Hussein is going to make some sort of an address. It will obviously be carried on Iraqi TV, and we will carry it as well to you.
Yeah, and we've been wondering here what he's going to say about the American POWs. If an American POW will appear with him, if that will be lived or taped. But right. As you said before, it's unlikely to be live because Saddam Hussein trusts absolutely no one right now. So it would be difficult for him to actually participate in a live broadcast.
Yeah, obviously with any sort of live broadcast, there are preparations one has to make in advance that would obviously perhaps hurt one's security situation.
Well, he would have to travel to the TV station. If it's on tape, he doesn't have to do that.
Right.
So
we're going to go, we have Carl Penhall on the beeper right now. He was involved in what is being described as a very intense Apache helicopter attack several hours ago. Carl, what's the latest where you are? You've returned to the base. How are things now?
Yes, Anderson, we're now back at the airfield. Sandstorms blowing in, but it is daytime now. The mission took place just after midnight and lasted for about 3 hours, so we got back before dawn. I've been talking to some of the pilots this morning who flew on the mission.
Okay, Carl, I'm sorry.
Those great
You're listening to Sahaf.
Mohammed Sahaf, the Iraqi Information Minister.
Sahid al-Sahaf, the Information Minister, listening.
To that nation, and during this time, the great leader Saddam Hussein will address our nation and our heroic armed forces, and to connect with his soldiers and to show them the path for victory after he consolidated the path of justice. His Excellency, the leader, President Saddam Hussein, talking to you.
What you are watching is a broadcast from Iraqi television just a moment ago, and we didn't really get any preparation for this, which is why we broke into Carl Penhalt. You saw the Iraqi Information Minister, Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, saying that Saddam Hussein was going to be making some sort of a statement apparently shortly.
Now, we don't, one important factor to note, we don't know if these are live pictures or tape pictures, but we do know the Information Minister of Iraq introduced Saddam Hussein, so we're expecting him shortly.
And of course, we will bring that to you live. There will be a lot of people very closely watching this, both at home and in the corridors of power in the United States and throughout the world, watching to see what Saddam Hussein looks like at this point, what he says, and trying to glean any kind of information they can out of his location. Let's listen in.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, when the victory comes from God and you witness the people coming to the religion of God in waves, praise the Lord and ask forgiveness. O great nation, the great mujahideen in our armed forces, peace be upon you. We know, and all of us in this patient and great nation knows how we have tried to show goodwill to the extent to where that some might have blamed us or found it strange that we showed so much patience. And how we responded to what we responded to, despite the fact that it did not show weakness and to show that the motives of the two administrations, the British and the American, aided by the Zionist administration, presenting new pretexts every day since the ceasefire in 1991 until the war that started today. Those decisive days which we live today, and where the Mujahideen and the great people of Iraq are contributing and showing their bravery, that they deserve the victory from God Almighty as was promised against the enemies of God and humanity. And we are entitled to. It's our duty to be proud, as the believers should be, to the heroic deeds that is being demonstrated by our great heroes today. We have always responded, even when we were asked to do things that they were illegitimate. So the sanctions and the blockade on our nation would be lifted. And after they run out of excuses and pretexts, the invaders came to reveal their true colors and showing their real intention, their evil intentions, which was not surprising to us. And you know, brothers, that our It's always been our aim to avoid evil, but when evil comes to us armed with the sword of destruction, then we have no choice. Today, you're standing, oh, you glorious Iraqis, men and women, and you heroes in our armed forces. Today, you're standing in a position that would please the friend and would anger the enemy and all the infidels. But you will be victorious against your enemies, and you are causing them to suffer. You rely on your God, and now it's clear to everyone that the aggression and the unjust is clear to everyone. In 1991, the aggression against our nation, the victory is soon. These decisive days, O you Iraqis, are in line with what God has ordered you, to cut their throats. And those who are the believers will be victorious. These decisive days, the enemy tried not using missiles and fighter jets as they did before. This time they sent their infantry troops. This time they have come to invade and occupy your land. And if the American and the British in this battle, they've been avoiding to meet you face to face, and they've been using their fighters in most cases. These forces this time has invaded our land, and everywhere it goes, it faces resistance. And every time it advances and leaves the desert behind it, it finds the Iraqis surrounding it and opening fire and resisting it. The members of the party and the tribes and the Fidayeen and the armed forces, everyone has been heroic in their resistance. Therefore, after they underestimated you, you Iraqis, now they've come on land. This attempt is our chance to incur losses on them. They are in a dilemma. They are in trouble now. Hit them and strike them. You Mujahideen, heroes, strike against your enemy with fear. You great Iraqi, inspired by the spirit of jihad that you have. and strike them until they come to the conclusion that they're not in a position to continue with their crimes against you and against humanity. And then you will have your stability, pride, and victory. And to our martyrs, who will be rewarded with paradise. As for you, you will be rewarded by God, and the lesson that you are teaching to the enemy will make him hesitant, unable after that to dare to challenge you or challenge humanity again. Strike them and strike evil, so evil will be defeated. And all those mothers will be able to sleep in peace. All those fathers and children that have been terrorized by the aggression, and all the eyes of the great people will sleep in peace, and your deeds and your jihad will send them back in disappointment and despair. And to the Arabs and to all great people around the world, we promise you what we have been promised by God in our struggle with the enemies of humanity, that God will support his soldiers and they will be defeated and humiliated. We will continue with our pact with God, and he is our witness, and the faithful around the world, that we are prepared to sacrifice everything we have to please him so he can support his soldiers. And we rely on him to humiliate the aggressors, the arrogant, and to disperse them and to turn their evil on them. We, alongside the soldiers of God in our land, after putting our faith in God and preparing what we can to achieve this victory, the Iraqi Mujahideen are causing the enemy to suffer and to lose every day, and as time goes they will lose more, and they will not be able to escape lightly from their predicament. We will make it as painful as we can against the enemy, so they will be defeated and choked and terrified before the faith which is endorsed by God. The resistance that has been bestowed on us by God Almighty on our land. It's my duty to salute in your name, you great Iraqis, your armed forces, and all the resistance groups, all in their fields. And when I name the names of those fighting and those great leaders, I mention every soldier
وضع نفسه مشروع شهادة لتسلم
that
المبادئ
is prepared to give his life to protect the principles and the great values and the faith that has been granted to us by God.
ويسلم الوطن والأرض
And the nation and the country will be safe,
بموقفه
and the people will be proud.
بعد أن أستأذن الجليل أقولها خاشعا
I say
متواضعا محتسبا
with
أن اعتزازي واعتزاز قيادتكم
fear of God in my heart that my
ليس له حدود.
pride in you
أيها المقاتلون
is
المجاهدون
without limits
على كل أرض العراق
to all those great people on the land of Iraq.
أصل النبوة ويحلو لي أن أخص بالذكر الجميل فرقة
I
المشاة
like
الحادية عشرة
I'm honored
في المقدمة
to mention the
بكل رجالها
infantry
المجاهدين الشجعان
brigade,
رجال القادسية وأم
the men of
المعارك
Al-Qadisiyah and the mother of all
في
battles,
تميزه في الإداء
their
والفداء
steadfastness
بمستوى يستحق أن يفتخر به
and
في
their
العراق
heroic deeds
بل
are
وكل
a source
شجاع
of
غيور
pride to all of
وعسكري
us.
كريم وفي الفرقة الحادية عشرة
The 11th
أخص في
Brigade,
المقدمة اللواء الخامس والأربعين للفرقة وهو
namely
اللواء
mention
الذي رافع راية
column
الجهاد
45
واسم العراق
and the
عليين
brigade that
في
has been
ملحمة قصر
fighting in Qasr and doing us great
رجال
honor.
البحرية وعد لكم المتميزين على رأس
And
تشكيلاتهم
I would like to name
لتحفظوا أسماءهم
some names of those people who have
الفرقة الحادية
distinguished
عشرة
themselves.
البطلة
The leader of the 11th
مصطفى
Brigade,
محمد عمران العزاوي
Mustafa Muhammad Amran Al-Azzawi,
كان الفرقة البطلة
and the chief
العميد الركن بشير أحمد عثمان
Bashir Ahmed Othman,
آمر اللواء الخامس
and
والأربعين
commander
البطل
of the 45th
العميد
45th Brigade,
الركن علي خليل إبراهيم
Ali Khalil
آمر
Ibrahim,
الفوج الأول البطل
and the commander
اللواء الخامس والأربعين
from the
البطل
45th Brigade,
المقدم الركن يحيى بدري دخيل
Yahya Badri
آمر
Dakhil,
الفوج الثاني البطل
and commander
اللواء الخامس
from the
والأربعين البطل
45th Brigade,
العقيد الركن
Colonel
محمد خلف الجبوري
Muhammad Khalaf Al-Jaburi,
آمر الفوج الثالث البطل
commander
من اللواء الخامس والأربعين البطل
45th 5th
العقيد
Brigade,
الركن فتحي غني
Colonel Fathi Ghani Majid,
وقد تجحفل بإمرة اللواء الخامس والأربعين البطل فوج خفر السواحل
and
وآمره
the
المقدم
border guards
الركن هيثم
and their
رشيد
commander Haytham
أحمد
Rashid,
البدران
Ahmed Al-Badran,
وآمر الفوج الثالث للواء السابع والأربعين
and the commander
من
of
الفرقة الحادية عشرة المقدم
11th Column,
الركن
Colonel
خالد محمد كسار
Khalid Muhammad
وأحيي
Kassar, and I'll salute in your name
قائد الفيلق الثالث
the commander
الفريق
of
الركن
the
نوري
3rd
داود
Division,
مشعل
Nuri Dawood
العويدي
Mashal
قائد
Al-Awaidi,
الفرقة الحادية والخمسين
and the commander
في
of
الفيلق الثالث
Brigade
اللواء الركن
51,
خالد حاتم صالح الهاشمي
General Khalid
وقائد
Al-Hashimi,
الفرقة المدرعة السادسة
and the leader of the
اللواء
6th
الركن
Brigade,
أعجبي برع
General
أحمد الخطاب
Ahmed
الناصري
Al-Khattab Al-Nasri,
وقائد
and the
الفرقة
commander
الثامنة عشر
of the 18th
اللواء الركن عادل عبد
Column,
الله غثوان
General Adil Abdullah Ghatwan Al-Ghrairi,
وقائد القوة البحرية اللواء البحري
and the commander of the Marine
محمود
Force,
حسن
Colonel
وإلى الأعداء أقول
Mahmoud
لقد
Hassan,
وجدنا
and to the
ما
enemies
وعدنا به الرحمن الرحيم
I say we have met what we have been promised by God Almighty. So what have you found? You are the disciples of the devil. And I say to our beloved in Basra, I say to them, patience, brothers, victory is imminent. And I say to you and to the people of beloved Baghdad and Mosul, the great city, city of weapons and swords, and to our people, people of Muthanna, I say to them, patience, brothers. You know too, and you all know, the people of Dhikar, the people of civilization and principles. You all know that the enemy that will tighten and increase its bombardment every time you resist him on the ground. So be patient, brothers and beloved ones. Be patient and God will grant you victory. I say to all of you that the enemies, every time they're defeated before you, forces on the ground, they will increase their bombardment. So be patient. Your position and your status with God is superior, and you will have victory. God is great. God is great, and long live our victorious nation. Long live Palestine, free and Arab, from the river to the sea. And long live Iraq. Long live Iraq. Long live Iraq. The country of jihad and virtue. And long live the Iraqis, symbol of jihad, proud hope and security and humanity. And best regard to all those who showed solidarity with our people in this encounter. And disgrace to the evil and their friends and those who have listened to evil. God is great.
You have been listening to a statement made by President Saddam Hussein of Iraq. A lot to talk about here. Let's bring in Christian Amanpour and Darren Kagan, who are joining us from Kuwait City.
And before you guys begin to speak, we want to welcome our international viewers because we're now being simulcast on CNN-I.
Christian, what did you take away from this?
Well, this is a very current speech. Obviously, I think there can be no doubt that this is A, the real person, and B, the person responding to events that have been going on in the last 24 hours at least. He specifically mentioned Qasr, one place which has been, for the last maybe 36 to 48 hours now, the subject of a battle. You know, the U.S. Marines who led the assault on Qasr under command of the British 3rd Commando Unit of the Royal Marines thought that they would take Qasr without much of a fight. It's a tiny little place. Look at it there on your map. It's a very small urban area. It has a very significant port. Anyway, they didn't take it, and it's still going on. They believe it's isolated pockets. But this to say that Saddam Hussein has been speaking about current battles, and he went on to talk about the other, quote, setbacks that, quote, the enemy has suffered, and they continue to lose every day, and they will lose even more as they continue every day. He says they will not be able to escape their predicament. We will make their pain as much as possible. And then he went on to talk about and to list the commanders and the senior officers of various brigades. For instance, the 45th Brigade, which is in Qasr, apparently, according to Saddam Hussein. Also, he mentioned a series of others, and notably the 51st Brigade, which was around Basra. Now, interestingly about this, we had been talked to by the military leaders on the US and British side, saying that a lot of these brigades and commanders had surrendered. But clearly, while there are significant surrenders, not most, but certain amounts of resistance continue, and they are there harassing the US and UK troops. And this proceeds up to Nasiriyah and elsewhere, as I said, also around Basra. In short, Darren, I think he was rallying his troops. He appeared much calmer, and his people much calmer, much more in control than the first speech that was broadcast several hours after the invasion started. And of course, with troops allegedly closing in on Baghdad, he's out there trying to rally them and trying to get them to keep up the fight, mentioning over and over again the issue of mujahideen, jihad, really appealing to the religious element in this as well.
A couple of other points I want to get you to comment on. First of all, looked a lot different than that first speech. In his military uniform, wasn't wearing the big, thick glasses that he was the first time. I think trying to give an image of appearing as a strong leader rather than the first time where he looked a little bit more worried, I think.
Well, I think so. And people who've been watching or already, you can see reaction coming out that this is a calmer, more in control Saddam Hussein. And I think also interesting, remembering the speeches he gave during the first Gulf War. And by the way, he commended one of the Al-Qadisiyah brigades, talking about how they are responding heroically, quote, in this battle, and mentioning how they responded heroically in the mother of all battles, which is the Iraqi leader's name for the Gulf War back in 1991. But yeah, he spoke a lot about to his people to be patient, that the enemy will increase the bombardment as our soldiers resist them on the ground. He was telling them to keep patient and prepared, and to keep sort of strong in the face of massive bombardment, which he said would continue. But again, in the Gulf War, it was much more full of bravado. We will win, we have won everywhere, this is, you know, the Allies are doing nothing. Here he's acknowledging that they're moving forward. He said as they leave the desert behind them, so he's acknowledging that they're moving forward, and but he's saying that they're still putting up heroic resistance. And indeed, there has been significant resistance over the last 24 hours.
And also, as you and I were sitting here watching it, one thing we were trying to figure out, is it live? Is it tape, as we did the first time when we saw the first tape? But perhaps not as significant in that, because he did give clues of current events. Perhaps this was taped, even though the Iraqi TV put up live, but clearly it would appear that Saddam Hussein is alive and in control of his country.
It seems so, and certainly from, I mean, it's really difficult for us here to make any kind of definitive judgment like that, but certainly there's been so many contradictory briefings by intel from the Allied side over the last several days. Was he injured? Was he not? Was he dead? Was he alive? So this is all going to fill in some of those clues to this big puzzle. And interestingly, a lot of this war is about psychological pressure. How many times have we been briefed that the war is aimed, for instance, to consolidate territory, to liberate towns, let's say in the south, to send a serious message to Baghdad that, look, we, US, UK, are in charge of this part. It's time now for you to step down and get the message. Well, a lot of that is going according to schedule, but there are these pockets of resistance, and it's not going as easily as perhaps some, maybe not the senior commanders, but some others were briefing reporters.
Had predicted or had hoped.
Yeah.
Originally, Saddam Hussein. Yes, go ahead.
This is Carol Costello.
Carol,
you know, I was struck by the fact, Christiane and Darren, that no mention of the American POWs was made, and of course many Americans are very concerned about them. Saddam said a lot of stuff like this. He said, we will make it as painful as we can against them. What was he specifically referring to, do you think?
Well, I think the resistance. I mean, there have been American casualties over the last 24 hours, particularly around Nasiriyah in south central on the Euphrates there, even to the point where some of those POWs, we understand, were captured to the rear, on some of the supply lines. And so that indicates that they are at least managing to mount certain harassment tactics, if you like. They're coming around. All the pockets of resistance have not been neutralized as this big force pushes up from the south and up to the north. They're going so fast. Today, one military spokesman suggested that perhaps they're going so fast and they're trying to avoid certain urban areas for obvious reasons, but perhaps that's making them unable to neutralize all the opposition. And Saddam specifically mentioned the Fedayeen. We've heard a lot over the last several months and even years about so-called Saddam's Fedayeen. They're often shown on television parading in their white shrouded uniforms, and this is a specific volunteer group that is being set up, you know, as one of those sort of close protection guards. So perhaps what's going on, and certainly what the British were talking to us about as their area of operations is in southeast Iraq. They're also meant to be trying to protect the American flank. As the Americans move up from the south and move on up to Nasiriyah and Baghdad eventually, the British are meant to be trying to make two protective measures. One up north near one of the rivers, the Tigris, and one to the rear to protect the American flank. But that takes time, and they haven't all got up in position yet.
I'd like you to comment on some of the language that we heard, because I think it would be interpreted differently in different parts of the world, either here in the Middle East or back in the States. One, some of the language using, we're going to make this as painful as we can. Also using language, Iraq will strike the necks of the enemy as God has commanded you. That's very strong language that will be interpreted differently in the United States than it would be here in the Middle East.
Perhaps, but it's part of the
bravado
language of this particular style. I mean, he's used that significantly in the past. I think, again, he's used the religious references significantly as well. And you can see that the Iraqi flag was, in fact, changed during the first Gulf War. It used never to have Allahu Akbar in the center of the flag, and it has had that for the last 12 years. God is great. It's, you know, their attempt to appeal to the greater Arab public, as you saw when he signed off, long live Iraq, but long live Palestine. And certainly, there are many, many people around the world who did not believe in this war, not too much sympathy for Saddam Hussein's regime, but many, many people around the world, and particularly around the Arab world, very concerned about the Iraqi people and, you know, the traditional sort of anti-war feelings.
As you said, his reference to Palestine, also his references to jihad.
Indeed, indeed. Iraq, the country of jihad. This is all language that's been appropriated, if you like, in the last 12 years, and for a very specific reason, and of course it resonates. Particularly, and let's say it again, at a time when the Arab-Israeli problem, the Palestine-Israeli problem, is at a very, you know, high peak. And of course, we're not hearing much about that right now because this situation has taken over pretty much wall-to-wall coverage. But they're appealing, obviously, to that. But I think in general, the point is, here he is, rallying his people, looking, as far as we can gather, all right, and being very complimentary and talking about his heroic soldiers, listing many people by name. And again, as they get closer to Baghdad, you know, trying to rally the people and the troops.
It will be what the United States is talking about as it wakes up. This is the middle of the night in the United States, and of course at different times all around the world, but it is the next development in this war.
Not the middle of the night around the world. No. People are looking now,
right now here in Kuwait, it's
quarter to midday.
Coming up on noon.
Yeah.
The timing interesting on when he chose to address his people and also the people here in the Middle East and around the world. Christiane Amanpour, thank you so much. Okay. Appreciate it. Back to you.
All right, back to us. We're going to have much more on Saddam Hussein's speech. Some of the interesting points about it, there were those strange camera switches during the broadcast. We couldn't really figure out what that was cameras about. It looked as if it were taped, but we don't know.
Right. I was actually talking to some of the technical people during the speech, saying that clearly there were two cameras and some sort of switching machine that allowed them to switch back and forth rather primitively between those two camera positions. It seemed the cameras were rather close together. There was a slight sync problem, I was told, as the cameras switched back and forth. One person just sort of their own personal opinion saying that it was either some sort of in-the-field switching machine, therefore not a very high-tech one, or just shoddy equipment. So
yeah, we just don't know. And if we could put up those pictures of the contrast between Saddam Hussein, who supposedly spoke today, and the Saddam Hussein who spoke Thursday, we did notice a great difference between the two.
Well, yeah, clearly, and as Christian pointed out, the image that we first saw soon after the coalition, the first coalition bombing, that decapitation strike. I mean, again, it's largely personal take, but you viewers can judge for yourself.
Yeah, decide for yourself. And Christian Amanpour has one more important point to make, so let's go back to Kuwait City and Christian. Christian.
Well, again, in his speech, he did go on at some length about telling the people of the world and the people of Iraq that, look, we have done everything that's been asked of us. He was obviously referring to cooperating with the weapons inspectors. We've done everything possible that was asked of us. Of course, the US and British would disagree with that, but nonetheless, trying to say that we've done everything, even to the point of things that were not legitimate to ask of a sovereign nation, hoping that the sanctions would be lifted over the last 12 years. And then he said, you know, when the Allies, or he didn't call them the Allies, when the UK and British run out of, quote, pretext, then they invaded and they came in with this military action. And he said to the people, remember last time it was about bombing and fighter jets, but this time they are going to use all their force because they are coming to take and occupy your land. So making a difference between what happened 12 years ago and what happened this time, and trying to put the reasonable face of the Iraqi regime forward by saying at length that we have cooperated, we've done everything they asked us to do.
And Christian, one more point. I know I keep bringing up the POWs, the American prisoners of war, but a lot of people in America are very concerned about them. Did it surprise you at all that he did not mention them in his speech?
I don't know how to prejudge what he would say. You know, I'm sure a lot of people hope to hear about that. Do we know exactly when this speech was recorded? No.
Yeah, it could be a day. I mean, some of the references you're making would show that he was current, but it could be a day or two old. Who knows?
Could be.
Could be. All right.
And if we were to try to adjust to make the prediction if we knew how this man thought, I mean, there have been books and books, and a lot of people around the world trying to figure that out about what he chooses to say and not say.
Certainly so. Darren Kagan, Christian Amanpour reporting live from Kuwait City. Some breaking news. Go ahead.
We also just want to thank our international viewers for joining us, and go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say we have breaking news in other parts of Iraq to get to, but...
Right, we're going to join shortly with Walter Rogers, who is with the 7th Cavalry in southern Iraq. He's on the right-hand side of the screen there, you see on a video phone.
David Williams and Robert Young are now POWs. We are releasing the names because CNN has informed them informed their families that they have been captured. Now, they appear to be unharmed in the television footage. Iraqi television also showed pictures of their helicopter in a field today. They say farmers shot it down. The U.S. says it is not clear if the Apache was shot down or had mechanical problems. Tonight, the Pentagon tells CNN the helicopter has since been destroyed by coalition forces. Well, Iraq's
on it about this time last night, just south of Baghdad. We now have a view of some of what went on. CNN's Carl Penhall was the embedded correspondent with the 11th Attack Helicopter Regiment of the Army's 5th Corps, and he's filed now on that attack.
What I can tell you is that the other Apache helicopters that flew alongside that came under heavy anti-aircraft fire as they flew a mission to attack Republican Guard positions around the town of Karbala. The aim of the mission was to destroy some T-72 tank emplacements, up to 90 T-72 tanks in that region, and some heavy artillery pieces. But as the helicopters flew into the target area, they came under heavy anti-aircraft fire, both from military emplacements and also, commanders say, from residential areas, in an effort not to target civilians or cause possible civilian deaths then many of the helicopters didn't unleash their Hellfire missiles for fear of destroying homes and the like. On return to the airfield where these Apache helicopters are now, the pilots throughout the day today have been assessing the damage that they received to their craft. Not one of them has escaped without a bullet impact. Most of them have anything between 10 and 20 bullet impacts. One even had an engine blown off by a rocket-propelled grenade.
Carl Penhall, who is with that group, and we expect we'll be hearing more from him as we go along. General Wesley Clark is here with us as always, and we can tell we just showed General a shot of that helicopter sitting in a field, and we can tell our viewers now that that helicopter is no longer sitting in that field, has been blown to bits because...
Well, we're not going to allow that technology to fall into the hands of the Iraqis or whoever's back there working with the Iraqis here.
Is that something that they send in, and how do they do that? Are there munitions on the helicopter that...
No, we would have sent in an airplane to just put a guided weapon right on the top of the helicopter.
How do you read this incident in the context of the overall plan? Because it, again, we tend to focus a lot on those specific things that we are witness to and can report, and it doesn't necessarily provide the broad picture. Is it the significance of it is good and bad? What?
Well, two things here. First, the reports we've been hearing have only talked about what happened to the Apaches. Nobody's reporting what happened to the Medina division.
Right.
In fact, I've received information from indirectly from Army sources that the Apache raid was effective. We destroyed a number of tanks, we destroyed a number of artillery pieces, killed a lot of Iraqi troops out there. That's been followed up today with more airstrikes. This is part of the process of breaking down and destroying the Medina division. Now, these Apache helicopters are built to take fire, and we knew when we designed them back 20 some odd years ago that they were going to be in a tough ground environment. That's the reason why they came back with all those holes and an engine missing. So the pilots they expect to do that. That's not to say that we won't do things differently the next time. We'd rather not have any fire at all. But as part of it, this is part of the campaign. It's, you know, it's a give and take thing, and it's basically on track.
One more question on this before we move on. To any extent, do you think that our ability to report these things in the way that we are now able to report them through the embedding process places undue emphasis on any one incident, this one in this case, at the expense of the broader picture?
Well, no, it's very hard to, when you get the information here, you're not receiving all the information that the Army has available. And even then, we don't know everything inside the Army. The soldiers there, the leaders don't know everything that's happened to the enemy. So you always know your own losses better than the enemy's losses. You know your own movement better than the enemy's movements. So you tend to go from exhilaration that we had with Walter Rogers the other night when we were dashing across the desert to despair when suddenly you take losses and you have people captured and so forth. When in reality, neither of these is tactically significant. What's is no more than of tactical significance. What's strategically significant is the force has moved up to close with the Iraqi Guard. It's consolidating its positions. It's preparing while the Air Force is continuing to grind away on Iraqi command and control.
All right. It's just a good thing to keep in mind that it seems to me that there is a large picture, and we'll deal a lot with the large picture tonight, but along the way we also deal with these snapshots, and we ought not get, all of us who are learning about this and in our case reporting on it, ought not get confused about it. It's about 6:10 in the morning in Baghdad now on a Tuesday morning. Quiet there now. There has been some activity, some explosions heard last night, Baghdad time last night. And you heard in the update some reporting that the airport, Saddam Hussein Airport, has been under attack. I think it is generally believed that the coalition would rather not destroy that airport completely because they would only then have to go in and build it, but obviously they have decided to do some damage to it or around to it, and we keep our eye on Baghdad as we go. The other major storyline tonight is again, as it was last night, the story of prisoners of war. 2 more Americans taken prisoner of war today, 2 helicopter pilots. Technically, one would have been the weapons operator sitting in the front seat and the pilot sitting in the back seat, though both are certainly capable of flying and both have controls to fly if they had to. Those are the young men. Ronald Young, his family lives outside of Atlanta here, and CNN's Susan Candiotti has talked with them. She talked with the family earlier. I guess I just said that, Susan, so I'm now repeated myself for the first time tonight. Susan, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. In fact, the family, as you can well imagine, has been glued around the television set all day long and all evening long, looking at everything they can possibly learn about their son, who they have now learned is a prisoner of war. Joining me now is Ronald Young's father, Ronald Young, also joining us. And one of the things we saw just a moment ago is General Clark saying that overall his information is that the attack, the Apache attack, was effective. But that also raises some questions in your mind, having seen your son's Apache helicopter.
Right, that helicopter looked like that he flew. Now, they started talking about how it'll take a hit, but it didn't have any known hits on it, and I was just wondering why it didn't return too. Of course, I know engine malfunctions and things like that, things can go wrong, but it's still not easy, you know, when it's your son.
We had talked about also that your wife had sort of a premonition when she initially heard the reports of and saw the downed helicopter.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, she said about 12 o'clock, she said she had this feeling that, this warm feeling that Ron was there with her. It was just like she was dreaming it or something like that, and she said that he had a soft smell, sweet smell about him when he was a baby, and she could detect that at that time, and I guess she felt like everything was, you know, that maybe something had really happened to him. I think it happens to do with mothers. I think maybe they're closer to their children than fathers are because they carry them for so long. But she does have this connection with her children, and it seems that it did pay off. This morning we found out that he was, you know, captured or was missing in action, is what they told us.
Well, clearly your entire family is very close. But when you were informed of this happening, I know your wife told me, she said, I knew it. Mm-hmm. And you were told that he was missing in action.
Right.
Then you saw for the first time pictures of him on television. Mm-hmm. Describe how that made you feel. First hearing that he was a prisoner of war, and then at least seeing him.
Well, at first, I felt like I didn't know whether he was alive or not, and that was a real big question for me. And as I went through the day, I said, well, he's got to be. I just feel like it's probably not him in the helicopter, and I convinced myself that it wasn't his. You know, that he had 1 out of 6 chances for it to be. But then, when the Army came up and told us, you know, the bad news that it was his helicopter, I had this sinking feeling, and I didn't know where. They wouldn't give me any information really, so I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. He was just missing. That's all it was. And then, of course,
you saw some of the insignias on the side of the helicopter.
Yes,
then you knew it was certainly his helicopter.
I knew that we saw the insignias earlier, and I knew it was one out of his
there are the pictures of it now.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I knew that due to the fact that those were his helicopters, that you know, there's six helicopters flying out of his detachment, so I knew
because in fact you saw a bat wing on the side.
That's correct. That's right.
That was one indicator that it might have been him.
Yes, ma'am.
You've seen the tape. You've seen these people cheering.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen how he looks on television. Mm-hmm. How does he appear to you?
He looks good on. You know, when I saw him, he looked like he's been treated well. It looks like it's just another day in the service for him. I mean, he doesn't look like he's had anything noticeably done to him. I mean, he looks good. He looks like I'd expect him to look if he was coming home.
I understand he always wanted to be a pilot.
Always, ever since he was a little boy, he thought about being a pilot and wanted to be a pilot. And he, of course, he got a chance with the Army, so that's where he took the opportunity to be able to go on to flight school and warrant officer school and become a pilot. And it's something he wanted to do. Of course, I've always been kind of fretful for him because I know being a pilot and in the service is a dangerous occupation.
You didn't always want him to
No. I was fine with him being a pilot, but I wasn't fine with us going to war. I mean, you know, it was just a natural thing.
How confident are you he'll come out of this all right?
Well, I feel better than I did. I mean, you know, he's alive, and that's one big thing that was a question in my mind at first. So if the Iraqis would treat him right and we treat their prisoners of war honorably and right, then I think that we got a chance to get them all back home. And that's what I hope for, not just him, but all of them, because they all have families just like me.
Indeed, why did you feel it was important to share with everyone how you feel about your son?
Because I know they would feel the same way. And it's not a good situation to be in whenever you lose contact with somebody that is as close to you as your son or your daughter or whatever.
Mr. Young, did you ever talk about the possibility of capture with your son?
Ma'am. I never even thought about the possibility. You know, that's something that you always think that happens to somebody else, not me. You know, and I felt like, well, the odds are, there's so many helicopters over there, that he'll get through it. But, you know, you just never can tell. And this is one of those times that you can't tell.
You feel he's prepared for it?
Well, he's a tough kid, and he's strong mentally. I think he's prepared for it, yeah. I know he's got a long time and a tough road to hoe, but I believe he's prepared for it.
Well, you certainly have a lot of people pulling for you, Mr. Young.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. And as you heard him say, he not only wants his own son back, he also wants the other gentleman back also, who has also been taken prisoner, and everybody else for that matter, Aaron.
Susan, thank you. Susan Candiotti. Let me quickly turn to General Clark. You and I were talking last night about the 5 young Army soldiers who were taken as POWs yesterday, and that they would not have received any particular training to cope with that sort of situation. Would a helicopter pilot, an Apache helicopter pilot have?
He will have received more. He may or may not have gone through a special escape and evasion course, but he will have received more training. He's been through his commissioning school. He knows more about how to conduct himself. A little bit more mature is what you would expect from someone of that rank, and he'll make it.
And just on the subject of rank, for people who don't keep track of such things, a chief warrant officer fits in where in the scheme of things?
Well, warrant officers are technical, and so they're not in the leadership chain like officers and
like a lieutenant
officers.
or a captain.
Right, you expect a lieutenant to later become a captain, become a major and so forth. Warrant officers go from warrant officer 1 to warrant officer 2, 3, 4, and some warrant officer 5s. And so, for example, in the aviation field, they can stay and fly helicopters continuously, whereas an officer who's an aviator would rotate in and out of aviation assignments. These warrant officers are the real experts.
That's a nice way to put it, thank you. So add tonight into your thoughts the names of these 2 young men, Ronald D. Young Jr., Chief Warrant Officer, family living in the state of Georgia, and also put into your thoughts tonight David Williams, David S. Williams, a Floridian. Both we know are in the custody of the Iraqi government, as are 5 other young Americans in the custody. Their families now have all been notified. As you can see, one of them is a young woman, Shoshana Johnson. We've heard from her family. They represent, in many respects, the true cross-section of the country. They come from the East Coast and the West, from the Midwest. They are African-American and Hispanic and Caucasian. They are very much a cross-section of the diversity of the country, and they ought to be very much in all of our thoughts tonight. Out in Fort Bliss, Texas, there's plenty of heartache there because of the fact it is home of the 507th Maintenance Company. 7 soldiers there are still listed as missing in action. And then there are the 5 that we just showed you who are, we know, prisoners of war. The 5th prisoner's family has now been notified, so now all 5 have been told formally by the Army that their son or daughter, husband, is a prisoner of war. Ed Lavandera has been at Fort Bliss, and this story broke, and he joins us again tonight. Ed.
Hi, Aaron. Well, you mentioned just a short while ago the Shoshana Johnson being the female prisoner of war. Just a few hours ago, we had the chance to speak with her father and sister, and we got into the issue of their concerns about her being a female prisoner of war and how that might or might not affect the situation she's in. They're really not sure exactly what to make of it, but they do say that it is a concern, and they wonder just exactly how she's being treated and whether or not she's being treated any differently from the male prisoners of war. So for them, there there is that issue outstanding. As I mentioned, we got to speak with them just a few hours ago. We spent 45 minutes with them talking about it. They explained to us how they found out about this situation. Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock, Claude Johnson, Shoshana's father, said he's flipping on the TV, trying to find some cartoons for his grandchild to watch. Instead, he flips across the Spanish language network, Telemundo, and finds that that network is broadcasting the images from the Iraqi front lines, and that is when he sees the images of his daughter in the custody of Iraqi soldiers. He said it wasn't until 6 hours later that they found out, got the official word from the Army officials here at Fort Bliss that in fact his daughter was a prisoner of war.
When she went over there, we knew that obviously this was a little bit more in-depth and more intensive, but I'm sure she didn't think that, I'm sure this is the last thing she thought was going to be on her mind. And she's in, maintenance is combat service support. You're not really supposed to be on the front lines at all. You know what I mean? They bring things back to you. You don't think about that stuff when you're a support element.
What happened? Did they miss a checkpoint? They made a wrong turn. Were they supposed to turn? What happened? Where's the breakdown?
You know you're going over there, but you never really think, you know, that this is going to happen. My sisters kind of have always had like a little angel following her around. She always manages to get out of stuff. So this was not something we thought was going to happen to her at all, you know, and in considering the whole situation in which some individuals did die, you know, and the fact that, you know, she was seen on TV, she looks to be staying strong, you know, hopefully her angel is still with her.
I'm hoping that because it was a big televised issue, that they will comply at least to show that they're not as much as the animals that they're portrayed to be.
Shoshana Johnson comes from a family, a military family. Her father you just heard from is a 20-year Army veteran. He's also a veteran of the 1991 Gulf War. Her sister that you just heard from as well, Nikki Johnson, is an Army captain based out of Fort Lee, Virginia. So they say that that background helps them cope with what's going on. But at some point you just stop being a military person and you become family, a mother, father, and a sister as well. And that is when the tears start to flow, they say. So as you've seen them very confident and stoic there, they do say that their last couple of days have been extremely emotional for them. And they also say, Aaron, that they have had very little contact with the officials here at Fort Bliss. And by the way, we've been here at Fort Bliss since Sunday. There have been several briefings that have been scheduled and canceled to talk about this. Officials here at this base say that that is per the guidance of the Pentagon that has asked them not to comment publicly on any of the details of this case until they get a little bit clearer picture as to what has happened with the 5 POWs there in Iraq.
Well, it's, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's not simply the 5 POWs because they know about the 5 POWs. They've seen them. They've seen the tape. In total, that Iraqi State TV showed, they have some sense of their condition. The broader concern, I assume, Ed, at Fort Bliss and at the Pentagon is the 7 others. And there are some pictures. We started talking about this last night, but they want to be sure of where those 7 are, whether they are alive or not, before they say very much. Is that that's not much of a question, but
well, you're absolutely correct. They are, the status of the other 7 isn't clear. There was 12 soldiers in all, part of the 507th maintenance company that was part of this unit that was taken into Iraqi custody. So yes, that's very much part of the concern and a lot of the reason why they haven't been able to answer any questions here just yet.
Thank you, Ed, very much. Ed Lavendero's down at Fort Bliss. General, 2 questions that were raised. Let me deal with the harder of the 2 first. I think when you talk about a woman being held as prisoner of war, I mean, there's certain sort of obvious and horrible things that run through your mind. This happened during the first Gulf War. There was a woman taken prisoner. She's now an Army colonel, as I recall. Do we have any evidence, one way or another, that women, in fact, were treated any worse by the Iraqis than the men were?
As far as I know, we don't. Okay. But the risk is always there, and, you know, it's a terrifying thing.
And then the other part of this is there was this long national debate about whether women should be in combat, and that was answered in an interesting way. No, they are not involved in direct combat, but as we know now very clearly, we learned this in the first Gulf War and we see it again, women are very much engaged in military operations, including being helicopter pilots.
Anywhere on that battlefield, you're in danger of being in direct combat. And that means you're in danger of being killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. And it really doesn't matter what your military occupational specialty is. You are at risk. And by the way, we have female pilots as well who are flying our strike aircraft in the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force. So it's not just the rear area.
It's funny that while a lot of people would assume this debate has gone on like about a lot of other debates, this one's long settled in the military. The military has in many ways led the way in certain respects in these areas of diversity and the like. They have integrated women in all sorts of ways. And we still sit around and argue about whether it makes sense or not. They just do the job.
We've moved past
way
this.
beyond it.
Women are great soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, and so forth. Can I just return for a
Please.
second? I think, as I recall the story from Gulf War, there were some sexual connotations in some of the actions that the female aviator suffered. But she was badly injured.
Yes.
And I think that may have kept it from being worse than it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what you worry about. And honestly, I mean, we looked at the tape of Shoshana Johnson yesterday, and she was obviously, as you would be or I would be or any human being on the planet would be, she was scared and nervous, and we just hope that they are decent and treat her decently.
Well, my heart goes out to them.
Yeah, it's all tricky business. We'll take a look at some of the politics of all of this as we go to the White House, other places, and obviously out to the battlefield too. We'll take a short break. First, our coverage continues in just a moment.
What can a pitching machine teach us about financial advisors? Working with one can leave you better prepared. At Wachovia Securities, we learn from the world around us and provide financial advice for whatever comes your way. Together, we can achieve uncommon results. Wachovia Securities.
CNN puts you alongside the troops with soldiers. Walter Rogers, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Brian Chilcote with sailors. Frank Buckley, Kira Phillips, Gary Stryker with airmen. Gary Tuckman, Bob Franken with Marines. Jason Bellini, Art Harris, Martin Savage. Plus, CNN joins forces with top news organizations and our network of affiliates to put more reporters in the region than anyone. No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
As the war in Iraq continues, CNN is there. From the front lines to the home front, around the world, around the clock. When you need to know, stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Good evening, everyone. From CNN Center, I'm Heidi Collins. Here's a look at our headlines before our coverage of the war continues.
Stories high. That's the Ministry of Information, and it is behind the Ministry of Information where the fire and the smoke were coming from a little earlier. That's where Iraqi television station is. Immediately behind the Ministry of Information, there's a small Christian church. Then there's a theater. Then there's that area of Iraqi television studios. Of course, to take out Iraqi television, it's not just a matter of hitting the studios, but also the transmitters as well. And Iraqi television's satellite channel has its satellite located just behind the Ministry of Information. And I did hear earlier that was still broadcasting and on the air. Aaron?
Nick, there is more than one TV network in Iraq, isn't there? Or TV channel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a state-run main station that perhaps most people would watch. There's also the station run by President Saddam Hussein's elder son, Uday Saddam Hussein. That's called Shabab TV or Youth TV. That's a station you may have seen pictures aired on today. It has quite a sort of a funny colored logo in the bottom right-hand corner. That was the station we saw today with the soldiers, with the pictures of the soldiers in those defensive trenches wearing the strange black helmets with the shoulder-launched RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades. So there is two ways of getting the domestic television picture out in Iraq. And not only is there the television stations, but there's also the radio broadcast we've heard a lot about. Of course, many Iraqis will tune into the radio rather than television to pick up messages from the leadership. But perhaps if Iraqi television has been taken off the air here, Aaron, and this is them going black now, that will take away a very important tool from the Iraqi leadership, that of showing their face, getting their message out to Iraqi people and really telling them that they are still in control. Aaron?
And in fact, a lot of people wondered why Iraqi TV had been allowed to stay on the air, why the coalition allowed Iraqi TV to stay on the air as long as it did. I suppose it had some value also to the coalition in that it allowed the coalition to see the Iraqi leadership, who was there, who was not there, but apparently that value ran out today.
Apparently, it was very interesting on the first day of the bombing campaign to watch how quickly President Saddam Hussein came out on television. So there are very quick sort of checks, if you will, for, as you say, for the coalition to see what was going on. Perhaps they did have another use, and I only say perhaps at this stage because no coalition officials have told me this, but there perhaps would be a degree of bomb damage assessment value in having Iraqi television on the air, because perhaps they would go to sites and film sites that have been bombed, those pictures getting out on Iraqi television, giving the coalition valuable ground-level information that just cannot be gained from satellite imagery. So perhaps there may have been some value or some use there as well, Aaron.
One other thing, in this day and age with the Al Jazeeras and the rest that are out there, is for the people of Iraq, is Iraqi TV, either of the two networks, to a certain extent, it's a distinction without difference because they are essentially under the same control. Are there other ways to get TV signals in?
Not really. I mean, the Arab broadcasters broadcast into the region, but their satellite dishes and receivers are banned, so ordinary Iraqis just don't have access to them. So they won't be able to pick up these other broadcasts. So really their television sets at this time will go dark, Aaron, if the station is truly knocked off the air.
Nick, thank you. Nick Robertson, who's in Jordan tonight, having been expelled by the Iraqi government a couple of days ago. But we see him pushing back towards the story, as it were, towards the war. This attack on the Iraqi television networks, or Iraqi TV, was part of a broader attack that took place early this morning in Baghdad. We do have some images of that that have come in from Abu Dhabi TV, I believe, and perhaps others. And we'll get those. There we go. These coming from Al Jazeera, apparently. This is how it looked. It was just before the sun came up in the Persian Gulf. It's now about 6 minutes after 6 o'clock out there when the strike occurred. There, you'll see a large explosion. That is not the hit, we do not believe, the hit on Iraqi TV, but it was part of a larger attack, that some of which was in camera range and some of which was not. And that's the scene right now in Baghdad. Lots of smoke filtering across the horizon line after this coalition airstrike, and we'll keep an eye on that. Overall, as we start tonight, a mix, I think you could say, of progress and obstacles today. And as you can see, even looking at these pictures and looking at Nick a few moments ago, the weather played a huge role in what was able to be accomplished by the coalition side. They are drawing closer to Baghdad all the time, but there is still much to be done behind them. The headline tonight, therefore, is really a night of many headlines, no single one, and we'll get through them as we go. But we begin with a quick overview of the day.
Whether it was a blinding sandstorm in the central part of the country or a downpour in the south near Basra, weather was the dominant factor in the war against Iraq today.
It's like being in a blizzard, except unfortunately the sand doesn't melt as the snow does.
Overall, here's what the landscape looks like tonight. Coalition ground units continue to make a broad sweep towards Baghdad. Elements of the Army's 3rd Infantry Division are 50 miles to the south and west of the Iraqi capital, and late today were engaged in a major battle with Iraqi units south of the city of Karbala. The British, meantime, are encircling Iraq's 2nd largest city, Basra.
In the 5 days since military action began, a huge amount has already been achieved.
Inside Basra, there were the smallest of hints that an uprising may have begun against Saddam Hussein. These pictures of a single gunman firing into the air and destroying a picture of Saddam are certainly not definitive proof. They are a hint, that's all. But British officials say at least it is a positive sign. Meantime, Iraqi television broadcasts these pictures of a coalition drone aircraft shot down and then paraded through the streets of Basra. No firm proof of chemical weapons was found today, but as far as the coalition was concerned, there were hints. Marines seized a hospital in the battered city of Nasiriyah and said they seized thousands of chemical weapons suits as well as conventional weapons. And finally, the southernmost Iraqi city of Qasr was declared under coalition control, finally, and the Navy actually brought in dolphins to help detect underwater mines.
Quick overview of where the day has gone and a quick update on where the day is now. Excuse me, all of the reporting we've been able to do now confirms that Iraqi state TV is off the air, that the coalition strike a little bit ago, an hour or so ago, has taken Iraqi TV off the air. There were other targets hit, but as you look at Baghdad now, you see the smoke. You saw a fire engine going by. Here's another shot from another location. This is the Lebanese broadcasting company, I believe, and the smoke there is quite dense. I'm not honestly sure if what is behind that building is the Iraqi State TV complex of buildings, as Nick Robertson described, or whether that's one of the other sites that was hit. But in any case, you can see that in the daylight, lots of smoke in Baghdad today, and among things that we can be certain of, despite all of the weather problems, and you're about to get a very good taste of the kind of weather they had there today. Despite all the weather problems, the coalition was still able to move in from the sky and do the business that it intends to do in the Iraqi capital and very likely in other places too, and we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. The ground battle formed was joined today. There have been a lot of skirmishes going on over the last few days, but there was what is at least described today as the first significant ground battle. The unit involved in this, we believe, is of particular interest to those of you who have been with us over the past week. The 307th Cavalry, we have pretty much followed them from the time they crossed the border to earlier today when we got some filing out of Walt Rogers as they made their way to what we believe this major ground battle was. We'll talk with Jamie McIntyre in a moment, but first Walt Rogers' description of the cavalry's march toward Baghdad.
What we're showing you is the convoy in which we're riding, heading north again in the general direction of north in a very strong sandstorm. It's like being in a blizzard, except unfortunately the sand doesn't melt as the snow does. Now, this gives some temporary military advantage to both sides, although the greater military advantage falls to the Iraqis. We have been under heavy fire for the past couple miles. Mostly a small arms fire, but the sandstorm has enabled the Iraqis to come very close to the road. And if I sound a little nervous, it's because we're in a soft-skinned vehicle and everybody else is in armor. The 7th Cavalry literally had to run something of a night ambush on both sides of the road last night, crossing one of the canal bridges that preceded the Euphrates River. And that fight was, as I say, more than significant. There were machine gun tracer bullets going out on either side of the road. Every Bradley, every tank was firing. Imagine looking out into total darkness in an agricultural area. You can't see more than 40 or 50 meters without night vision goggles. And you know there are people out there. We had no idea how many people were out there, but it turned out to be several hundred, 300-400 Iraqi dismounts. The U.S. Army 7th Cavalry has just taken 3 Iraqi prisoners of war. Actually, they're very close, that is to say no more than 40 yards away, but the dust and sand are blowing so badly you're getting these vague images. They were captured by the U.S. Army up the road, not very far ahead of us. They were driving a truckload of weapons, and that's when the Army apprehended them. They've had their arms tied. They're lying in the sand now. No evidence of any hostility on their part now, but the only mistreatment is that which we all suffer, which is to say an abuse of Mother Nature by a sandstorm.
CNN's Walt Rogers reporting on the road to what turned into a significant ground fight. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. I think we have 2 things to talk to you about right at the top. What we know about this ground fight or battle, however we want to frame it, and the attack this evening on Iraqi State TV. Good evening to you.
Well, good evening. Let's start with the ground battle. First of all, the first reports we got from the Pentagon turned out to be a little inflated. Initially, we'd heard perhaps even as many as 300 to 500 Iraqis had been killed by U.S. Army soldiers. By the time the subsequent reports came in, we were being told maybe it was more like 150 to 200. Still a significant engagement, though, on the ground, and the U.S. suffered no combat deaths or casualties, any significant casualties. Apparently, this group of Iraqi fighters, and we're not clear if they were Republican Guard or these Fedayeen Saddam fighters or some other irregulars, were fired rocket-propelled grenades at some of these U.S. Army troops. The vastly superior U.S. firepower was brought to bear, and the result was a total U.S. victory in this battle, again, killing between 150 and 200 Iraqis, suffering no casualties on the U.S. side.
Just before you move on from that, in the significance of what the war is, a battle where 150 to 200 enemy soldiers are killed is what? Big, medium, little?
Militarily, it's not very significant. It's a very small battle. But psychologically, especially coming after a day when the U.S. had suffered some casualties, it's a big boost for morale.
And again, just we've got the big box up showing the smoke moving across the city of Baghdad. How much of the city looks like that, obviously we can't tell, but from this location, it is very dense, really as dense as anything we've seen. It is much closer into the city than anything we've seen before. Now, Jamie, on State TV, this is no surprise to you, is it?
Well, Pentagon sources are not confirming that this is actually Iraqi television that was hit, except what they have told me is Iraqi television was on the list of targets to be hit very soon, sort of like right about this time. So it's very likely that that's what's happening here. And the other thing that I would stress is that they may have in fact hit the tower or the transmitter and not the Ministry of Information itself. It's not clear. What the U.S. is operating under these days is something they call effects-based warfare, where they try to create the maximum effect with the minimum amount of munitions. In this case, the effect is to take the television off the air, and you don't need to level the whole building or complex to do that. So they'll probably just check to see whether it's on the air and decide whether they need to take any more action.
Well, we can tell them from our reporters there that it's not on the air. So they know at least that much for now. Now, on to the Secretary's Day. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld woke up to see front page headlines that were roundly critical of the war plan.
And here's what Secretary Rumsfeld would say about that. He'd say, first of all, it's hard to criticize a war plan if you don't know what the war plan is. And he assures us that we don't know the war plan and nobody has reported the war plan. And it's they claim, a very methodically thought out plan. They went over it. It went through at least 20 different versions. They've been over it for months. And the key, he says, is for people to understand that it may take days or weeks and to have patience.